Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Sunnah TV. Shirk did not begin with a stone. It began with love. Picture the earth in its earliest days. The children of Adam, peace be upon him, still walked under the same sky their father had walked under. They knew Allah. They worshipped him alone. There were no idols, no statues, no altars stained with sacrifice. The world was clean. And yet, hidden inside that pure world, a seed was already planted. A seed so small, so innocent, that no one saw the danger in it. For 10 generations, the earth held its faith. Then something cracked, and the strangest part is this: the people who took that first step away from Allah were not evil. They were grieving. To understand how the entire world fell into idol worship, we have to go back to the death of a single righteous man and the funeral that quietly changed everything. To understand this story, you first have to understand the world Adam left behind. When Allah created Adam, peace be upon him, he did not create a man wandering in confusion about his Lord. Adam knew. He had spoken with the angels. He had been taught the names of all things. He had lived even briefly in a place of light that no human after him would ever see in this life. And when he came down to the earth, he came down carrying knowledge. He knew who Allah was. He knew that worship belonged to Allah alone. And he passed that certainty to his children the way a father passes down his most precious inheritance. So the first human society on earth was not a society of idol worshippers searching for the truth. It was the opposite. It was a society that already had the truth, living in the warmth of it, generation after generation. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, told us something that most people never stop to think about. He said that between Adam and Nuh, peace be upon them both, there were 10 generations. And all of them were upon the truth. 10 generations, centuries upon centuries, the whole earth united upon the worship of one God. Think about how rare that is. Today we live in a world drowning in 1,000 religions, 1,000,000 philosophies, endless arguments about who God is and whether he even exists. But in those early days, there was no confusion. The matter was settled. People were born knowing their Lord the way they were born knowing the warmth of the sun. And in that righteous world there lived great men, men of worship, men of knowledge, men whose faces seemed to glow with their nearness to Allah. The early generations loved these men deeply because in a world that still remembered Adam, righteousness was the highest thing a person could possess. There were no celebrities, there were no kings worshipped for their gold. The people the community admired most were the ones who prayed the longest, who remembered Allah the most, who carried the inheritance of Adam's faith with the steadiest hands. The Quran preserves 5 of their names, names that, if you read the surah quickly, you might skip over without a second thought. Wad, Suwa, Yaghuth, Yaghuth, Nasr. 5 names, 5 men. And these were not idols, not at first. These were human beings, righteous, beloved, respected human beings who lived among their people and called them to Allah. This is the part the world forgot. We hear the word idol and we imagine something built from the beginning to be worshipped, a thing carved by a lost and ignorant people who never knew better. But that is not how it began. The first idols on earth were not built by people who hated God. They were built in a strange and tragic way by people who loved goodness so much that their love eventually betrayed them. Imagine living in that community. Imagine these 5 righteous men as living lights among you. When you had a question about your faith, you went to them. When you felt your heart growing cold, you sat in their gatherings and felt it warm again. When the nights of doubt came, their voices steadied you. They were not just teachers, they were the pillars holding up the spiritual life of an entire people. And pillars feel permanent. That is the trap. When something holds you up for your entire life, you start to believe it will hold you up forever. You stop imagining a world without it. You build your faith not only on Allah, but quietly, without noticing, on the people who point you toward Allah. So the community leaned and leaned and leaned. For years, this leaning caused no harm. The men were alive. They corrected the people. They kept the worship pure. If anyone had ever bowed to them, they would have stopped it instantly, horrified. As long as they breathed, the line between honoring a righteous man and worshipping him stayed clear and bright. But righteous men do not live forever. That is the one thing the people forgot to prepare for. One by one, these 5 great men grew old. Their voices grew quieter. Their gatherings grew shorter. And the community watched with a creeping dread they could not name as the lights that had guided them began, slowly, to dim. And the day finally came that every community fears but never truly believes will arrive. The day the first of them died. The grief that swept through the people on that day was real and heavy and human. They wept the way you weep when something you thought was permanent is suddenly gone. They did not know it yet, but standing around that grave, in their tears and their longing, they were about to take the very first step away from the faith of Adam. And the most terrifying thing about that step is that no one even felt themselves take it. The danger did not arrive as temptation, it arrived as comfort. When the first of those righteous men died, the people gathered in a grief so deep that the whole community felt hollowed out. A light had gone out, and the darkness it left behind was unbearable. They kept turning to where he used to sit and finding only empty space. They kept expecting his voice and hearing only silence. Grief does strange things to the human heart. It makes you reach for anything that brings the lost one closer. And in that raw, aching season, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, told us exactly what happened. He explained that the Shaytan came to these people and whispered an idea to them, not an evil idea on its surface, a beautiful one, a comforting one. He suggested that they set up images, statues, memorials of these righteous men in the places where they used to sit and worship. Not to worship them, never to worship them, only to remember them. Only so that when the people gathered in those places, the sight of those familiar forms would stir their hearts and remind them to be devoted to Allah, the way these men had been devoted. Read that again, slowly, because everything turns on it. The first idols on earth were built as motivation, as inspiration, as a tool for worship, not an object of it. The intention was pure. The Shaytan did not say, "Abandon your Lord." He said, "Here is something to help you remember your Lord." He dressed the poison in the clothing of devotion, and the people listened. Why wouldn't they? It made sense. They missed these men terribly. They wanted to keep their memory alive. They wanted the next generation to know what greatness looked like. So they carved the images. They placed them in the gathering spots, and for a while it seemed to work exactly as promised. People would walk past the image of a beloved scholar and feel their faith stir. They would remember his words. They would stand a little straighter in their prayer. No one bowed, no one prayed to the statues. The line between honoring and worshipping was still there. But here is what they did not understand. That line is not a wall. It is a slope, and they had just stepped onto the top of it. The first generation knew exactly what those images were. They had known the men personally. They remembered their faces, their laughter, their human weakness. To them, a statue of Wad was just a statue of a man named Wad, a good man, a dead man, nothing more. They felt the warmth of the memory, but never confused the carving with the Creator. Their knowledge protected them. But knowledge does not pass down through blood. It passes down through teaching, and teaching can be incomplete. Years passed, that first generation grew old and died. A new generation rose, and they had never met Wad. They had never sat in his gatherings or heard his voice or watched him weep in prayer. To them, Wad was not a memory. Wad was a statue that had always been there, A sacred object their parents treated with deep respect, a figure their elders gathered around with lowered voices and reverent hearts. They saw the reverence. They did not inherit the understanding behind it. This is the quiet engine of misguidance, and it runs in every age, including ours. One generation does something with a clear and limited intention. The next generation sees the action but loses the intention. And the third generation invents a new meaning to explain what they see. The children watch their parents honor these images, and slowly, without any single moment you could point to and call the fall, the honor curdled into something else. Then came the doubt that the Shaytan had been waiting centuries to plant, a whisper in the new generation's heart. Why did our forefathers build these? Surely it was not for nothing. Surely there is power in them. Surely these forms can hear us, can help us, can carry our needs to the heavens. The people who built the idols would have been horrified, but they were dust now, and the dead cannot correct the living. And so the slope steepened. What began as a memorial became a symbol. What became a symbol became a relic. What became a relic became sacred. And the human heart, which always wants something it can see and touch and beg from in its moment of desperation, did the rest. There is something deeply unsettling here, something that should make every one of us pause. These were not stupid people. They were not cruel. The first ones were not even disobedient. They loved righteousness. They honored the righteous. They wanted sincerely to stay close to Allah. And that very desire, twisted just slightly, just 1 degree off course, became the doorway through which idol worship entered the earth for the first time in human history. The Shaytan is patient. He did not need to corrupt one generation. He only needed to plant a seed in one and wait for the third to harvest it. And by the time that harvest came, the people standing before those idols had completely forgotten that the things they were now calling upon were once only men. Men who had died. Men who could not help themselves, let alone anyone else. That forgetting was about to become the most dangerous thing on earth. And then one day, someone fell to the ground before the idol. We do not know his name. We do not know the moment exactly. But it happened. After generations of honoring, remembering, revering, leaning, someone finally crossed the line that no one had ever crossed since the day Adam set foot on the earth. Someone bent their back and lowered their face, not to the one who made the heavens and the earth, but to a carved figure of a man who had been dead for centuries. And the sky did not fall. That was the horror of it. Nothing happened, no thunder, no punishment in that instant. The man rose, and the world continued, and others saw. And what was once unthinkable became thinkable, and what became thinkable became normal. This is how the first shirk on earth was born. Not in a single dramatic moment of rebellion, in a slow, quiet drift that took generations, where each step felt small, reasonable, even loving, until the people looked up one day and realized the entire world had turned its face away from Allah without anyone ever deciding to. The 5 names spread: Wad, Suwa, Yaghuth, Ya'uq, Nasr. They were no longer the names of dead scholars. They were now gods. Tribes adopted them. Wad became the god of one people, Suwa of another. Yaghuth, Ya'uq, Nasr divided among the rest. Temples rose, sacrifices were offered, prayers that belonged only to Allah were now whispered to stone and wood. The pure earth that Adam left behind was gone, and here is the detail that should stop your heart. These same 5 idols, these very names, survived. They traveled through time. They were carried across centuries and deserts, and thousands of years later, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was born into the city of Makkah, these same idols were still being worshipped by the Arabs. The Quran names them directly in the words of Nuh's people, but the Arabs of Makkah still clung to them. The shirk that began with a grieving community honoring its dead had outlived every one of the people who started it. It had become the inheritance of the world. But we have moved ahead of the story. Because before these idols reached Makkah, there was a man Allah sent to confront them at their very source. His name was Nuh, peace be upon him. Allah raised him among these people, the people who had taken the 5 righteous men and made them lords. And Nuh stood before them with one message, the same message every prophet would carry after him. Worship Allah alone. Leave these idols. They cannot hear you. They cannot help you. They are nothing but the names of men your grandfathers loved and then ruined. Imagine the weight of that mission. Nuh was not speaking to people who had never known the truth. He was speaking to the descendants of believers. He was trying to pull a people back across a line they had been drifting away from for generations. A line so old that no one alive even remembered it existing. And the Quran tells us how long he stood there calling them. 950 years. Read that number and let it land. 9.5 centuries of preaching, night and day, in secret and in the open. Pleading, warning, reasoning, begging. One man against the accumulated drift of generations. And what did they say back to him? The Quran preserves their exact words, and they are chilling. They told each other, do not abandon your gods. Do not abandon Wad, nor Suwa, nor Yaghuth, nor Ya'uk, nor Nasr. Hold on to them. They named the 5. They wrapped their arms around the very statues that had stolen their hearts from Allah, and they refused to let go. They covered their ears. They wrapped their garments over their heads so they would not have to hear him. They mocked him. They called him mad. The longer he called, the harder their hearts became. The very people who had started with love for righteousness had now become so attached to false gods that they would rather drown than let them go. And that is exactly the choice that came. Because there is a line, and Allah had warned them of it through Nuh for nearly 1,000 years, and finally they crossed the last one, the point of no return. When a nation is given every warning, every chance, every mercy, and still chooses the carved stone over the Creator, the command comes from above the 7 heavens, and it is never reversed. Nuh raised his hands at last. After centuries of patience, he turned to his Lord, and the rain began. But the rain is not where this story ends, because the most important question is not what happened to that drowned nation. The most important question is what their story is screaming at you right now, across thousands of years, and why Allah made sure you would hear it. The water came from the sky and rose from the earth until the two met, and a world ended. The people who had clung to Wad and Suwa and the rest found that their gods could not summon a single drop of mercy when the real flood came. The idols stood silent as the water climbed over them. The temples filled and collapsed. Every prayer ever whispered to those carved men was answered with the same deafening silence those statues had always offered. The silence that the first generation had known about and the last generation had forgotten. Stone cannot save you. It never could. And in that flood, the long, slow tragedy that began at a single grave reached its terrible end. A faith that had taken 10 generations to lose was washed from the earth in days. But notice what Allah did, even in his punishment. He did not erase the lesson. He preserved it. He carried it forward in his own words so that no future generation could ever say they were not warned. The names of those 5 idols are written into the Quran, in the 11th surah, and again in the 71st, the surah that carries Nuh's own name. Allah recorded the names of the very objects that destroyed a nation, and he told us their origin so that we would understand the most important warning in the history of human worship. And that warning is this: shirk does not announce itself. It does not arrive wearing the face of evil. It arrives wearing the face of love, of grief, of respect, of devotion. It comes dressed as the very thing you think will bring you closer to Allah. Sit with how frightening that is. The people of Nuh did not wake up one morning and decide to abandon God. There was no moment of rebellion, no clenched fist rejection of the truth. There was only a community that loved its righteous dead a little too much, that leaned on creation a little too heavily, that let reverence drift 1 degree at a time until, generations later, their descendants were bowing to stone and would rather drown than stop. This is why the scholars of Islam, throughout the centuries, have treated the matters surrounding worship with such intense seriousness, a seriousness that sometimes confuses people today. Why so much concern about graves? Why so much caution about exaggerating the status of righteous people, even truly righteous people? Why did the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, warn his own community so sternly near the end of his life against turning the graves of prophets into places of worship? Why, as he lay dying, did he warn against the very thing the nations before had fallen into? Because he knew this story. He knew it better than anyone. He knew that the first shirk on earth was born in a graveyard, out of grief and love, among people who thought they were doing something beautiful. And he knew the human heart had not changed. The same heart that leaned on wad beats in our chests today. Feel the weight of the chain here. 5 righteous men die. A grieving people build memorials. The intention is pure. 3 generations later, those memorials are gods. Thousands of years later, those same gods are still standing in Makkah, and the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is sent to tear them down, to finish the work that Nuh began, to complete a mission that had spanned the entire history of mankind. When he finally entered Makkah victorious and the idols around the Kaaba fell, he was not just clearing a city, he was reversing the oldest mistake humanity ever made. He was returning the earth to what it was in the days of Adam. There is a verse he would recite as the idols crumbled, the verse that says truth has come and falsehood has vanished. For falsehood is ever bound to vanish. And in that moment, every idol that ever stood, every wad, every Suwa, every false god born from a grieving heart was answered. But here is the part that should keep you awake tonight. Falsehood vanished from the Kaaba. Did it vanish from the human heart? Because the mechanism that destroyed the people of Nuh was never really about statues. The statues were just the final form. The real disease was deeper. It was the tendency of the human heart to attach its hope, its fear, its desperate need to something it can see instead of the one it cannot. And that tendency did not drown in the flood. It did not crumble in Makkah. It is alive, it is in us, and it is wearing new clothes today. That is the thought we cannot walk away from. So let me ask you the question this entire story was built to ask. What is your wad? Because the idol was never really the problem. The idol was just the place the heart finally landed. The real story is about a heart that slowly, gently, lovingly transferred its deepest reliance away from Allah and onto something else, and never noticed the transfer happening. The people of Nuh did not need a statue to begin falling. They needed only to lean on creation more than they leaned on the Creator. The statue came later. The leaning came first. And the leaning is what should frighten us, because we do it every single day. We say we trust Allah, but our hearts shake when the paycheck is threatened, as if the job is the provider and not the one who gives the job. We say Allah is enough, but we are crushed when a person leaves us, leaning on their love the way those people leaned on their scholars, building our whole sense of safety on a human being who, like Wad, will one day die. We chase the approval of people as if their opinion is the throne we must bow before. We refresh the screen, waiting for validation, and feel empty when it does not come, having quietly made something other than Allah the source of our worth. None of us carve statues, but the heart does not need a chisel to commit its quiet idolatry. It only needs to forget where its hope truly belongs. This is the genius and the mercy of why Allah told us this story. He did not tell us about Wad and Suwa to give us a history lesson about an old dead civilization. He told us so that we would look at our own lives with new eyes, so that when we feel ourselves leaning too hard on a person, a job, an image, a follower count, a reputation, we would hear across thousands of years the sound of rising water and remember what happens to a heart that gives its reliance to something that cannot save it. The people of Nuh teach us that misguidance rarely begins with a sin. It usually begins with a love that lost its limits. Loving the righteous is good. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was loved more deeply than any human being who ever lived, and that love is part of our faith. But love must stay in its place. The moment any love climbs above the love of Allah, the moment any reliance replaces reliance on Allah, the slope begins. And the slope does not feel like a slope while you are on it. It feels like devotion. It feels like loyalty. It feels like grief. It feels like all the things the people of Nuh felt at that first funeral. So the lesson is not to love less. It is to keep Allah at the center and to let everything else orbit around him, never replacing him. To honor the righteous without worshipping them. To love people without drowning in them. To work without believing the work is the provider. To hold the dunya in your hand and never in your heart. There is a reason Allah opens the Quran by teaching us to say, "You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help." We say it in every prayer many times a day. It is the antidote to the entire story of Nuh. You alone, not the saint, not the scholar, not the statue, not the screen, not the self, you alone. The people of Nuh forgot those two words across 10 generations. We are given the chance to remember them 17 times a day. So tonight, before you sleep, ask your own heart the question those people never asked themselves in time. Where is my hope actually resting? When I am afraid, what do I reach for first? When I am desperate, whose name rises to my lips before any other? If the honest answer is anything other than Allah, then you have found your Wad, and you have found it while there is still time to let it go. That is a mercy the people of Nuh were not given. They held their idols until the water took them. You can release yours tonight with a single sincere turn of the heart back to the one who made you. Idol worship did not begin with a stone. It began with a heart that leaned the wrong way. And it will end in your own life the moment your heart leans back toward Allah and refuses, no matter what it loses, to ever bow to anything else again.